Yes, Ulrika, over to you.
Okay, thank you. Welcome everybody to the third workshop of the second International Police Education Conference in 2020 in very special circumstances. And so, as you all know, the subject of the conference is dealing with the matter we are all dealing with at the moment. My name is Ulrike Neuhoff from Germany, from the International Meeting and Education Center, IBZ Castle Gimborne, the education center of the International Police Association. With me today are May-Britt Ronnebro from Sweden, Rick Sarre from Australia, and two police officers from Peru, but more to them later. First of all, we're gonna listen to May-Britt Ronnebro. May-Britt Ronnebro is a superintendent, a senior advisor on the crime prevention at the Swedish National Police. She holds a master degree in criminology and police management from Cambridge University. I mean, there is even much more to say about her. She is also Secretary General of the International Executive Board of the International Police Association. So May-Britt is the one who is responsible for the concept of the workshop that will run today and tomorrow. And my thanks and the thanks of all the other participants go to her for the fine work she did for that. May-Britt will be followed by Professor Rick Sarre from the University South Australia for Justice and Society, and they all will tackle in the talks. They will give, of course, aspects of the pandemic and the connection with policing. May-Britt will today talk about the crime development during the pandemic, and I would just like to give you some information how we are going to run the workshop. There are going to be two short talks. The first one by May-Britt, the second one by Rick. Then we're going to have a short break. You have the possibility to write down questions, and then there's going to be a 10-minute slot at the end for your questions and answers. And at the end of the workshop, that will be after the third talk given by Javier Gamero Kinosita and his colleague Sergio Monar Moyoli. There will be drawn a conclusion by May-Britt. So I hope technology is working. We have a great backup with Daisy and Karen. If something goes wrong, they're just going to jump in and help us. And I would like to give the word right now to May-Britt.
Good morning, everyone. I'm very pleased to be one of the presenters of today, and also I will be returning back tomorrow. This morning we will have a look at the development that is crime prevention during this pandemic, and I got a presentation for you that I would like to share from the very beginning. I do hope you can follow. Well, crime development during the COVID-19 pandemic, we will have a very brief look at the statistics. We will look at crime patterns and also the change of the police role, Sweden and worldwide. Well, just to give you a glance where I'm located, this is the map of the Nordic countries and or more or less Scandinavia. You got Sweden, and I work in what's called Gothenburg. We will have a brief look at the pandemic situation, the crime prevention, change of crime pattern, and change of the police role. And there will be a kind of conclusion and pandemic development that we will look at as well. in Sweden, we had to stay at home, and if we were unwell, this was very different to many other countries. If we had any kind of symptom that could be connected to what might have been the COVID-19 virus, stay at home, and we didn't have to lose any wages or anything during this time. And this is still in force. Of course, like the rest of the world, we were taught how to wash our hands for 20 seconds and use a lot of soap. And this went to be something that people bought quite frequently and in large quantities. Keep distance was something else as well. Added to the two first one, it was to in the beginning is 1 meter, then we moved to 2.5 meters, and we moved back to 2 meters, and now it's 1.5. So it was the same indoor or outdoor. We should also be careful, and we had a time when we couldn't visit anyone that was aged above 70 years. And these people had to stay in their homes or allocate a certain time to go outdoor. Of course, they want to be an object, of course, for offenders, as they all knew when they would be outdoor. Work from home if it was possible, and of course avoid large social gatherings. We had a number of 50 people, and this is still on for all kind of places, except if you went to do shopping, then it could be more people in the store. Before we move in to look at this one, we will go through a few of the other things as well that did affect us during the start of the pandemic. Interaction with the public in many countries around the world have been minimized and arrest limited when we look at what the police had to do. However, still situation of offenses that are immediate public safety risk had to occur, and people didn't follow all the recommendations, lockdowns or shutdowns. Regardless the changes during the COVID-19 pandemic, law enforcement agencies had to continue to uphold the rule of law to maintain public safety, prevent victimization, and support vulnerable communities. To tackle the COVID-19 pandemic, countries across the world had implemented a range of stringent policies, including stay at home, as lockdowns, or for some what's called shutdowns. There had been schools and workplaces closure, cancellation of events and public gatherings, and restriction of public transportation. The Swedish National Health Authority recommended the population to walk or cycle to work, if possible, and to go by public transportation only for essential travels. In Sweden, who never faced a lockdown, we are recommended outdoor activities as parks or forest walks, hiking, jogging, cycling, riding, etc. To understand the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, we need to bear in mind that in 2016, for example, 263 people died in traffic accidents in Sweden. At the same year, 725 people were recorded to have died from the winter flu. So if you look at this and compare to the figures of today, the pandemic of the COVID-19 is really hard to cope with. 95% of those who died from flu were over 65 years old, and so it is also now when we look at the COVID-19. The flu is in most countries are divided into different categories, but if you look from category A to D, between 290,000 to 650,000 people die in the winter flu or the flu that we look at. The coronavirus has so far taken over 1 million lives. But if you look at the impact of the restrictions, I would like you to look close on this slide. In Sweden, the government gave recommendations and restrictions, however, no lockdown, which moved the public out into the nature. Parks and forests went to be the safe meeting place. Policing had to move to the same area in regards to crime prevention as theft from vehicles that went to be more common. Some risk groups started to work from home, and the increase of domestic violence was slightly noted in springtime. With more people at home, also media reported increase of digital crimes against vulnerable persons. Business as usual dropped by 8%. And you can see on this that is recorded by Google how we're moving around, that the Swedish people went out for what is called parks, it's outdoor activities. Looking at UK, in UK with the lockdown, people were forced into their homes. The record of businesses dropped dramatically. When the lockdown eased, people chose parks, beaches, and nature as location to spend time. Few could return to work due to restrictions of square meters and air condition systems. Also in UK, media reported increase of domestic violence and digital crimes. And we can see a different in the moving of people due to the lockdown. If I just slightly look at New Zealand, another country who put the lockdown in force early of the COVID-19 pandemic, they could also record dramatic decrease of business and people moved home as requested. Our presenter from New Zealand will cover their situation closer in their presentation tomorrow. And finally, when we look at people's movement during the pandemic so far until the 4th of October, Peru is one of the countries that have been affected very hard by the COVID-19 pandemic. Here, as in many countries where a lockdown came in force, people followed the request and moved to their homes. Everything else moved more or less stopped. We will get a presentation on the development during this workshop later today. The world is currently dealing with a crisis that is affecting virtually every part of the society, including crime and human security. Crime prevention work is also affected by the development of the pandemic. We will probably see both short-term and long-term effects of the pandemic, and the changing life pattern is bringing on crime and security. Some types of crimes are likely to increase and others decrease, and very greatly depending on the context. In order to be able to work proactively and prevent a negative development in terms of crime and security, it is good, even under the circumstances, to stick to knowledge-based and evidence-based work that is based on concrete and collective observations on the extent, structure, and development of crime. This applies to all levels of society and regardless of the type of crime. This is because of behavior can change quickly, sometimes from day to day, based on new instructions and recommendations. For example, traveling, closure of schools, closing times for public meeting places as pubs and restaurants. For crime prevention coordinators in municipalities or municipality police officer, it can, in the short term, mean making tighter resolutions with actors who work in the local community, but also look at those other stakeholders like victims, crime victims shelters, women's shelters, and other voluntary organizations working in the field. It is especially important to take advantage of the commitments we see in many people who want to take responsibility and help. The positive commitment can also be used to increase people's security in society in several ways during difficult times. The routine activity theory crime is likely to occur where three essential elements of crime converge in space and time: a motivated offender, attractive target, and absence of capable guardians. In Sweden, offenders moved into the private home, which is not policed by the police. NGOs opened women's shelter hotlines for domestic violence victims, and children hotlines had to increase adults who answered the boost of calls from vulnerable children. Parallel, the crime prevention officers at the National Fraud Section delivered online and television information covering cybercrime against the elderly population and lonely people in single housing. The broken window theory had to be applied in Stockholm area in Sweden, but during June, July and August, the criminal damage in public places notably increased. The municipality had as stakeholder to step in and repair or restore damages on public property and in public housing areas. International, we could also via media follow crackdown policing in India, for example, where the police chased and shamed people who didn't follow the restriction on the lockdown. The method is in this form cannot be seen as a successful. However, larger number of visible police officers in the streets of Italy was greeted positive by the people that was facing the lockdown. In the situation of lockdown, the police and the public service had to work according to the situational prevention theory in social, medical and crime matters to identify where and how the public could be protected from the COVID-19 virus and from crime. When we look at the recording that is done by the Swedish National Council for Crime Prevention, they do normally an annual recording. This went to be changed as we moved into the pandemic. We had an increase of reported crime to the police in January and February, January +7% and in February +10%. But what happened when people moved home or out in the nature, we had a slight drop in March and April. For March -4 and for April -5. This followed with May, when people still followed the recommendation of working from home or not go out in public areas to do party or something like that could be in larger numbers, a drop of -3. However, when they recorded June and July, we saw an increase, and that was really shocking for the country. But looking closer into it, we saw that this increase was this criminal damage in the Stockholm area, where people had been badly affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. And we could see that the rest of the country did not have the same impact as the Stockholm area. In August, and also for September, the figures just came for September, we continued the decrease of reported crimes to the police. Of course, we can never estimate the unreported things that are happening. If you had a look of the world on the 12th of May 2020, you could see that most of the countries around the world had different kind of restrictions, even total lockdown. And the dark blue is the one that is a total lockdown, everything. The lighter blue had recommendation or restrictions, and people stayed indoor. They stayed at home. They didn't do that lot of work as expected. And you could understand that most of crimes moved elsewhere, not from the streets, from the pubs, and where we normally find criminality, into the homes and online. And we then look at the 8th of October this year. We could see that the map of lockdowns, closure, bans and restrictions were totally different due to the fact that we had a bad economy, and we had to give people possibility to move outdoor and start to move around. Unfortunately, now we see the second wave of the pandemic. There are situations where we today look at a second lockdown and more strict recommendations from the government. And the Swedish government is also looking at this. We still are able to move freely. However, the restrictions of 50 people in a gathering is still on. The change of the police, well, major incidents and events, it's a kind of expression that is used by the Swedish police, was put in force on the 13th of May. They form a special board and they follow everything that is happening within the police, but also outside in the society. This was taken away on the 5th of October this year for Sweden, and we are now using this in the normal line of policing to cover up the COVID-19 pandemic. We can also see that the police officers and forensic officers through this time been facing risk of being affected by the COVID-19 virus. And we had to do special campaigns of awareness and how to protect yourself. We saw all the pictures of the health and medical people, but this was also something that we had to buy and arrange for police officers that are facing this kind of ongoing crimes or crime scenes. The COVID-19 policing went to be quite complicated as we had a free movement moving in the country. People moved around, even though a lot of people moved indoor, you still had a lot of people outdoor. And to keep the distance and also keep safe in a situation of an arrest was some of those really challenging times that we had to face. I already mentioned domestic violence against women, children. Of course, there are men also victims of domestic violence, but vulnerable people and repeat victimization that went to be really hard to report. One of the things that was implemented was a chat line where you didn't have to talk. It was a chat line where people instead could just send in and tell that something is going on in my home. I need police officer or I need the social services to come and knock on the door to help me. And it went to be quite frequently used. And of course, the same with the hotline for children. Burglaries moved from domestic burglaries into worksite burglaries, but less people went to work. And lot of people moved home. Everyone that could work on their computer and via telephone left the offices building. Of course, we saw an increase in this kind of burglaries. And police also had to monitor work sites and industry sites in a totally different way compared to what we had done before. The crime patterns, even though we normally would face a lot of domestic burglaries during October, now we had a lot of factory, industry, office burglaries during this time. That is not the common thing for us. Criminal damage, I already mentioned. This was a reaction from the young people that had been locked out from school from age of 16, and all the further education had to move online. Frustration, not meeting friends, went to be criminal damage as a result of it. Online fraud, Zoom bombing was some of those things that was reported in this time. And we could see that we were not the only country. Germany had really bad time concerning Zoom bombing. At the same time, international, we faced disasters many places. And this was also COVID policing at the same time as we had to deal with disasters. So very quickly, increase in domestic violence, increase in cyber crimes. We had vulnerable children that was in really risk, and we needed to support them as good as we could. Change of the police role. we will look closer on this when we listen tomorrow from Ireland about the change for the crime prevention police officer. Dramatic increase in academic articles on COVID-19 pandemic, medicine, policing, financial impact. And it went to be hard to decide which one is the one that we really should read and make as a reference. Politicians in panic and denial is one of the things, or they decided recommendations or restrictions that was not in the line of what the health service told us what to do. So I would like to say very thank you for listening to me. There's so a lot to tell around this, but I would like to hand over to Ulrike, and so we can listen to the rest of the speakers for today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, May-Britt, for this very interesting and inspiring talk. And I did collect some questions from the chat, which we will be put to you later in the slot for question and answers. And I would like now to introduce Rick Sarre from Australia. Professor Rick Sarre is a emeritus professor of law and criminal justice, and at the University of South Australia. He was the Dean of Law at the School of Law at the University of South Australia, and he has a very broad professional profile, which includes degrees for law and criminology from unis in Adelaide, Toronto, Canberra. He is the immediate past president of the Association of the Australian and New Zealand Society of Criminology. So we really have an expert talking to us, and his subject will be the pop-up police spy stations that shall find people who break COVID laws, and which from my experience here in Germany, I can say this is something that the population has been taken over already. Everybody seems to be spying on everybody in order to pick out and to identify those who break the rules that have been put on us now. So thank you very much, Rick Sarre, for giving this talk today, and the floor is yours.
Well, thank you very much, Ulrika. And in fact, I'm very delighted to be down here greeting you in the evening of Adelaide, South Australia. I've got a little slideshow that I'll take you through in the next 15 minutes, essentially looking at this topic, this broad topic of policing in COVID-19 times. And May-Britt has covered essentially the matters that have been arising, which have been causing social discord. And one of the questions, of course, is how best do we equip our police in order to meet those demands. And one way, of course, is essentially through this whole field of surveillance. And I'm going to look at this idea through the lens of the public surveillance, which I think we can say is now called the new pandemic-inspired normal. And as Ulrika has just said, in Melbourne, where most of the outbreaks have occurred in the last 2 to 3 months, we now have mobile CCTV cameras located in public parks. And although this was never said, it was, of course, to nab anyone breaking the lockdown rules. Now, I'll just interpolate there, and Ulrika reminded me with her reference to Germany that some 40 years ago, that's a long time ago, I arrived in Berlin and went into East Berlin under Checkpoint Charlie. And the first thing we noticed as we were walking around in East Berlin was, one, it was very deserted, and two, it seemed everyone was watching us. And one of my colleagues at the time said, this is the difference between the freedom of the West and the targeted police state in the East, that you're under surveillance here all the time. And the reason I mention that anecdote is because it really has turned around. There's no question in the last 40 years that the West has become as surveilled as the East formerly had been. And of course, that was attracting our criticism. So what's interesting about that is that you can't turn a corner in London, you can't turn a corner in Sydney without someone observing what you were doing. And we found during the pandemic that the police were using these so-called pop-up CCTV vans in order to watch the population and ensure that people were obeying the rules under the lockdown. So 3 questions. Are the cameras legal? Are they effective? And is this the sort of state that we wish to live in? So let me just pick up on this first question about whether the cameras themselves are legal. And the answer is yes. Yes, they are. By regulation, CCTV cameras are erected in public places, just in the same way that you would turn a corner in London and see a camera. You'd see a camera in a store, you'd see a camera in a park. And by regulation, the Parliament has directed that people with whom these powers are now bestowed can launch whatever they like in terms of public surveillance. The one that is the most concerning, I suppose, from a public perception point of view, are the ones that we have just had announced here in Melbourne over this last weekend. Some of you may know that the grand final between the 2 finalists in the AFL, the Australian Football League, was being played in Brisbane. The Melbourneites couldn't go to Brisbane because of the lockdown rules and the closed state boundaries, but they were also forbidden from fraternising with their neighbours. And I'm laughing, but it was no laughing matter that the police at some point said that it was not unlikely that they could put UAVs, or the drones, into the air over certain suburbs to make sure there were no backyard parties looking at the television screens in order to watch the grand final being held, not in Melbourne where it is always held, but indeed in Brisbane. Now, as I understand it, that never happened. I think the public perception of that level of surveillance was never going to work politically. Nevertheless, if they wanted to do that by virtue of the lockdown regulations and the very good reason why the idea of keeping your social and spatial distance would keep the virus at bay, that the Parliament would have every protection from the courts should there be some suggestion that that lockdown was overkill. The bottom line is the surveillance tools are backed at regulatory force by all levels of government. So are they effective? Are they effective not just, of course, in terms of policing in COVID-19 times, but in policing generally? And the answer is, well, unless there's someone actively monitoring that particular camera right there, the camera itself is not useful for anything other than determining a demographic trend. In other words, who's walking down that path, how many people are in the park at the same time, are there people who are gathering together, etc. And it might provide something of a deterrent for those who might consider committing an offence under public health legislation. But it makes no sense just to have the camera if what you are doing is not putting people on the ground, because you could look at the camera the following day, realise that people were fraternising when they shouldn't have been, but you can't arrest them because you can't identify them. So my guess would be the only reason those cameras were there were to assist police officers with the evidence required should that person be taken into custody or detained in some way, presented to court the following day and fined accordingly. The bottom line is these cameras were in place in some instances in terms of suburbs where there are great levels of transmission occurring at the moment. They may still be in place. So they are legal. They are probably effective in terms of making sure that if you are going to arrest someone, you've got the evidence, and there may be some deterrent effect. But all of that is very uncertain at this time. The question is, finally, are they acceptable? And this is where we come down to the idea of police legitimacy. What happens when a government has an overkill in terms of its surveillance? And I've written here, many individuals will be alarmed at the way in which they are being drawn into an ever-increasing vortex of what's called uberveillance. That is, our every move is being monitored as if we were in North Korea or China or Iran or places where people are under surveillance all the time, people who would be subjected to a police state. And of course, part of the wonders of the West is that in fact we are not part of a police state. We do feel comfortable about moving around. And in those circumstances, one would hope that the police were not going to be part of that overveillance, lose their legitimacy. And as we know from police theory, once the police start to lose their legitimacy, the effectiveness of policing generally goes out the window. As I say in the second part of this slide, the parliaments, of course, are empowered to legislate for overt and covert surveillance, and they will respond to calls if citizens demand this of them. And my guess would be, as we found this last weekend, with the drone suggestion flying over backyards of Melbourneites who may or may not have been gathering together in groups of 10 or 15 or 20 and figuring that something was flying around in the air at them and causing them to be prosecuted and fined. I think at that particular point we started to tip into the unknown in terms of whether or not the Parliament had overstepped the mark. At some point, people will stop saying, yes, I understand the lockdown is important, and start saying this is no longer a legitimate way for the police to surveil the society. So that's the important balance that we have to strike here. Parliamentarians have to be very, very careful, and the police in carrying out those wishes very, very careful before they overstep the mark and lose their legitimacy. If they lose their legitimacy in relation to those things, that house of cards starts to fall right across the board. So my response in relation to this is to do three things by way of ensuring that the balance is struck appropriately and not in terms of what George Orwell might have referred to as the 1984 state. Firstly, we need to ensure the images and other data when collected by surveillance device operators are stored appropriately and discarded when no longer needed. At this stage, we really don't know how long those tapes are being kept. I do know, because I've worked with private security, not police, but private security in the past, and know that those tapes are typically kept for 1 week because you simply can't have the hardware, although digitally I suppose it's a little easier, but eventually your gigabytes are going to run out, and so they start copying over the top of other tapes. But we don't know about that. We simply don't know where those data are being kept and how they're being kept, what security they're being kept under, and whether they're being discarded when no longer needed. I'd hate to think that my family picnic in the park was going to be kept and available for use by police or security in 10 years' time. Number two, if there are excesses in the manner in which images are gathered and shared, we need to be able to hold those operators to account. And that's an important aspect of this as well. There is a case here in Australia some years ago, fortunately some years ago, I don't know of anything that's happened in more recent years, where camera operators in the Perth casino were using the cameras to zoom in on people who are at the tables and at the bars. And you don't need much of an imagination to think they were not zooming in on men in their suits. They were zooming in on women in their glamorous outfits. And those excesses went without remonstration for a number of years until someone reported them, in which case there were hundreds of hours of contraband tape confiscated from a security firm that had been using them for voyeuristic and prurient reasons. And we need to be able to hold those operators to account by virtue of having a good oversight mechanism to ensure those people who are given the opportunity to carry out these surveillance exercises, particularly given how close drones and UAVs can get to people's windows, to ensure that those people are held to account should there be excesses. And thirdly, there needs to be a legal remedy in the event that there's a serious invasion of privacy by the misuse of that data. Now, different countries around the world have dealt with privacy in different ways. The UK, New Zealand, the United States all have aspects of legislation and common law that do protect privacy to a greater or lesser degree. I can report here in Australia that we don't have a tort of serious invasion of privacy. The simple answer is because every time someone talks about it, the media cry foul and say that would be the end of investigative journalism as we know it. And we know how politicians are very much in the, I won't say in the hands of proprietors of the media, but they know that if they get the proprietors of media offside, then the stories that they need in order to get re-elected are sometimes ignored. So we need to ensure that our laws concerning privacy are up to speed enough that in the circumstances where a person has been surveilled by this means, by the UAVs and by the pop-up CCTVs, have got an opportunity to get some redress in the circumstances where those surveillance tools have been misused. So I've got about a minute or two to finish here. Let me add, just by way of conclusion, these two axioms. Parliamentarians are unlikely to limit the powers of the executive to enact regulations that allow greater surveillance unless it becomes politically unpopular. What I say about that is that should the public say, I'm sorry, but this idea of a pop-up CCTV camera sounds too much like the Stasi of the old East Germany, and we're not going to abide by it, that message getting back to parliamentarians will affect the way in which the parliamentarians will carry out their duties and their regulations, and they'll pull back from circumstances where in carrying out those laws they threaten the legitimacy not only of the police but the legitimacy of the government as well. And the second conclusion is to say that uberveillance is worrisome. We understand it's needed in terms of a pandemic, but all members of a vibrant democracy must place pressure on governments not to use crises such as the pandemic to threaten the freedoms we enjoy to be as anonymous as we wish. It's a balance to be struck. Everyone realizes that lockdowns are important because the best way the virus extends is through personal human contact. By the same token, those restrictions need to be put in place in a way that does not threaten a person's sense that they live in a vibrant democracy. As soon as that happens, governments and police start losing their legitimacy, and then the whole house of cards falls down. And with those last words, with my 16 minutes up, I'll show you a pretty picture of some not so social distancing compatriots of mine here down under. Thanks very much, Ulrika.
Thank you very much, Rick, for this very interesting and inspiring talk. And I think you just hit the bottom of my heart with your last remarks. And you say democratic, vibrant society should be very much aware of what surveillance can do to them, and that we are really responsible for what's going on in the society. Rick, unfortunately, you didn't share your screen with us, and we didn't want to interrupt you because, I mean, it was so interesting to listen to you, and we agreed we don't need your slides. Your talk is enough to follow you. There you are.
Here I am.
Is it okay if we circulate your presentation with a recording so that the people can look it up? Are you happy?
Certainly, that's fine. Yes. Okay. I was using the slides as prompts to my comments. So essentially, all you'll see is some pretty slides. You'll actually see a nice kangaroo. Let me take you to the kangaroo slide because that is cute. Let me do that. Share my screen.
They don't know anything about social distancing.
Kangaroos do not know anything about social distancing.
And they don't wash their hands either.
Okay, no. My kangaroos have all hopped away. I'm sorry. You can see me and that's all.
Okay, thank you very much, Rick. And I think we're going to have a 5-minute break now and shall all be back in 5 minutes. Okay, thank you.
Very good.
Welcome back, everybody. Probably had a coffee or a cup of tea, wherever you are. So it's a pleasure for me now to welcome from two very fine, high-profile gentlemen from South America. Javier Gamero Kinosita is a retired police officer, a criminologist, a legal translator. He holds degrees in police sciences and administration, in law, criminology, and currently he works as a translator for courts, prisons, and police of the canton of Bern and Fribourg. And he will be supported and joined by Sergio Monar Moyoli, who is the general of the National Police of Peru. He's specialized in strategic intelligence, cyber intelligence, digital security, and he's an advisor to the Ministry of Interior of Peru on public security. They both would talk about the COVID-19 situation in South America, Latin America. They will talk about shifting patterns of policing, and they will also talk about the National Police of Peru in face of COVID-19. And we are very much looking forward to hear your talk about the situation at this end of the world, for us, end of the world, not yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ulrich. I'm going to share my screen. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
We can see your slides. Everything is all right.
Okay. Thank you very much. Good day to all of you from Switzerland and Peru. Our paper has as title, Evidence Challenging for the National Police of Peru in the field of security, delinquency, and social order in times of pandemic. The Israeli historian Yuval Harari says, there are decades where nothing happens and weeks where the decades go by. Coronavirus is an undeniable testimony of this because it has affected millions of people on the planet, especially Latin America. It has triggered a deep change in the world. Coronavirus is now seen as an accelerator of history because in a very short time we have an excessive use of new technologies by states in name of security and at cost of the citizen, highlighting the fragility of human security and calling into question current prevention measures. Pandemic COVID-19 has made the structural vulnerability of Western democracy more visible, particularly in Peru. This paper is structured in 5 parts. First, pandemic in the Iraq society on the 21st century. Second, situational diagnosis of COVID-19 in Latin America. Third, shifting pattern of policing during the COVID-19 pandemic crisis. Fourth, the National Police of Peru in the face of COVID-19. And finally, conclusion. It will address the first dry chapter, and General Monar, direct from Lima, will address the following 2 last chapters. First, I'm going to deal the pandemic in the right society of the 21st century. We have here in general information. We are living in the right society is the theory of the German scientist Ulrich Beck, and he told us risks are normal reflection of progress and development, and it is not possible to eliminate them. At most, we can reduce them. We don't have a safe harbor. We are living in a permanent insecurity. We must coexist with them because the risks are inherent in the new world order. Which are these global risks? International terrorism, nuclear and atom threats, organized crimes, and finally we have pandemic. In the second column, we have the imminent future wars. There is a theory of Andrea Rinke and Christian Schwegel from Germany, and they identify the imminent future wars in this new century. We have here the frozen war due to climate change, the war for raw materials, the protein war in the northern Atlantic, the cyber warfare in the deep sea, the war for food due to dry lands, the war for interplanetary space, the war for new technologies, information technology warfare, on the wars resulting from migration, and finally we have the pandemics. In the third column, we have the emerging global threat and challenge established by International Institute for Global Security Studies in Spain, whom they identify as a global threat, weapons of mass destruction, organized crimes, terrorism, military and armed conflict, spying, cyber attacks, and as a challenge, we have the climate change, energy dependence, economic crisis, natural disaster, migration flow, and finally to pandemic. I can tell you finally in this page, the pandemic is a global risk, is an imminent future war, one emerging global threat and challenging in the 21st century. Das müssen wir wissen. Second, I'm going to deal the situational diagnosis of COVID-19 in Latin America. This graph of the World Bank or Johns Hopkins University revealed that Peru has the worst management of COVID-19 in the world, and this has naturally a negative impact of the work of the Peruvian National Police. The most affected Latin American countries with the highest mortality in the world after Peru are Bolivia, Brazil, Chile, Ecuador, Mexico, Panama, Colombia, and Argentina. Taking in consideration the demographic density in relation to the number of deaths per COVID-19, the first place in this table was held by Peru. And finally, I'm going to deal the shifting pattern of policing during the COVID-19 pandemic crisis. Institutional focus, the pandemic spread a new infectious virus, it triggered a crisis, enforcement general lockdown and quarantine, a state of national emergency is declared. The police forces, as tool of the government, has new executive orders, especially the isolating infections hotspots. The police forces have new tasks and new challenges. This national emergency state regards the restriction of the fundamental rights. In Peru, we have 4 fundamental rights: personal liberty, freedom of movement, freedom of assembly, and finally, inviolability at the home. We are going to see here the internal perspective of the police. The policing, the new normal is very difficult for the police. The police suddenly need to reorganize and reshuffle resources. The police must react to receding and rising level of crimes and criminal offenses. Here we have domestic violence, child abuse, fraud, and cyber crimes. The police has the need to self-protection. We have more or less 500 policemen dead. In Panama, we have 500 policemen dead. In Bolivia, 155 dead policemen. We have the need to adopt strategies in everyday police work. We have a reprioritization of tasks. The police force has new priorities of tasks. In the other column, we can see the police and public in Corona times. Is very. There are the negative side. We have the policing of crowd, street protests, and civilian unrest is very difficult for the police. The police must use new tools, new tracking instruments, drones, thermal imaging, etc. We have a mistrust of official government communication, fake news, disinformation, misinformation. We have a social distrust. We have a low levels of compliance with the regulation. And we have finally a decrease in public confidence in the police. The population is insatisfied by the Peruvian National Police. Power giving the police could have an impact in human rights. On the other side, we have the community policing on social support. It's a positive sign because the police give assistance to population, and that is very good for the population because they are going to be satisfied. We have here in Peru a polarization of public opinion. And finally, I'm going to speak about the rising of cyber crimes. We are living in a surveillance society. We have a population under surveillance. We have identified the cyber offenses, the cyber targets, and the cyber risks. Within cyber offenses, we have the racism and violence, piracy, money laundering, online fraud, terrorism, intellectual property crimes, sexual abuse, virtual currencies, organized crimes, and corruption. Within cyber targets, we have health system, patient, critical infrastructure, financial, strategic, industry 4.0, educational, cloud, all storage, private data, market manager, government, public institution, small and medium enterprises, service, hotel, restaurant. And finally, within cyber risk, we have patient sensitive information, classified information, confidential information, secrets of jihadism, investment, fraud, documents, teleworking, device control, police and family control, competition, small and medium enterprises, and service, account, and supply chain. Now, General Monar from Lima is going to do an institutional autopsy of the National Police of Peru in the following two last chapters. Thank you very much. Please, Sergio, you can continue with the presentation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Javier. Well, I'm the General of the National Police of Peru, Sergio Monar Moyoli, President of the International Police Association Peru section, and I will be pleased to continue with the presentation. Number 4, the National Police of Peru in the face of COVID-19 pandemic. Background: March 6, 2020, first confirmed case of COVID-19. March 15, 2020, state of national emergency, national police in charge of controlling the fulfillment of sanitary security measures. 130,000 police officers nationwide. Initial problems: lack of specific procedures to avoid contact with citizens in their task of citizen control and police functions in police stations. Lack of personal protection equipment, for example, masks, gloves, alcohol, and others. Hospitals of the National Police of Peru, insufficient number of beds, medicines, and medical personnel. In the upper box, we can see a red dot which indicates a decreasing trend of police killed by COVID-19. In this regard, Minister of the Interior of Peru declared that there are 37,720 policemen infected by COVID-19 and 506 policemen have died from this disease. Also, he pointed out that there are more than 6,000 policemen with a high risk of contagion. The decrease in police deaths from COVID-19 has as its main causes the improvement of the police health system to face this disease, but also the use of technology, such as the implementation of the management and delivery of police records, the receipt of the digital police complaint, through the use of the internet in the process of development are the issuance of levies and duplicate or of special permits. With this automated service, it is sought to reduce the number of people in police stations, as well as the use of video conference for meeting of work, training, and task control. In the lower box, we can see an example of the pocket manuals with information on the security measures against COVID-19 that the police must carry out during their daily work and good treatment with the citizens. Next. Main problems in acquiring equipment and medicines to protect the health of police personnel. Insufficient budget for this type of purchase and in the required quantities. State procurement processes have many stages and require time. Permanent variation of costs of medical supplies makes it difficult to plan purchases. Corruption in acquisitions cause overruns, cancellations of purchasing processes, investigations, bad image affects authority. For example, we can see a front page of a newspaper in Peru, which shows the problems of corruption in police purchases, but it can also be seen that the police receives their health protection equipment thanks to correct measures adopted. Next. May actions carried out by the National Police. Heading to health personnel. Ivermectin production in the police hospital laboratory. Ivermectin is a recommended medicine for the treatment of COVID. Implementation of call center National Police for attention COVID. Currently, it's becoming a telemedicine system. Cancellation of purchasing processes with signs of corruptions. Agreement with the Minister of Health, purchase of medicines and equipment. Acceptance of donations from private companies. Training of purchasing officers in the police. In the image, we can see a general view and the interior of one of the field hospitals implemented in a police station, as well as the President of Peru and the Minister of the Interior receiving the donation of 2 oxygen plants for the hospital of the policeman. These actions helped a lot in protecting the health of police personnel and strengthening their morale. Number 5. Next. Number 5. Conclusions. The security and police forces are required to enforce and police an unfamiliar set of new sanctional social norms on a large scale. With social reality changing, opportunity structures for various criminal offenses are changing as well need for reorganization and resourcing. The new normal may result in a new normal of crime patterns, law enforcement adapting accordingly. At the same time, the legitimacy of the police is questioned at a general level due to the great attention of the media. An effective response to health crisis is rooted in the respect of human rights and emphasizes empowerment, and community engagement, including policies that build trust and social solidarity. Next. Penalties must be a last resort after other alternatives have been proven unsuccessful, or if it becomes clear that objective cannot be achieved by those other means. Conferring additional powers to the police and focusing on the coercive enforcement of lockdown measures should be considered only as last resort. People are more likely to comply after a police encounter if they feel they have been treated fairly, have received an explanation, and have been given the opportunity to give their view. A model of police intervention must be based on the 4Es principle: engage, explain, encourage, and enforce. The crisis of COVID-19 gives us the chance for reflecting on and reforming the status of police forces in democracies of the 21st century. Thank you very much for your kind attention. Our presentation is available to all of you, and I will appreciate you could send your question to our emails. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, first of all, Sergio Kinosita, for drawing our attention to the theoretical basics of what risk societies in the 21st century might have to face, and just drawing our attention to the pandemic aspect. And thank you very much for giving us information about the situation in Peru, which I think is very interesting and very inspiring, because we can see similarities and we can see differences. And what I would like to do right now is, because I collected the questions and remarks, and I would like to share my screen, and I honestly hope it's going to work. And I know Daisy is in the back and she's probably going to help me. I'm a moderator, and yeah, so. No, you can't see my screen, can you?
Yes, we can see your screen, Rick.
You can see my screen, great. So here we are. Just a second. This is not, no, put this on. Have to pull this over. Here are some questions to May-Britt. I think partly they have been answered. Was the criminal damage in Stockholm directed at any one or thing in particular? David wants to know.
Well, I wrote about that. It was most of the buildings that are public buildings, like government buildings, municipality buildings, cracked windows, paint that was thrown onto it, and it was frustrations. So they damaged trees and bushes and name it. Small fires was set as well. Lot of negative graffiti that was not art in the way of what we normally accept it in Sweden. So it was a reaction of being locked in, even though they never went to be locked in, because most of the ones that was caught on the scene were young people that had been closed out from school in Mars and couldn't go back to do their graduation parties or anything like this. Frustration not meeting friends.
Do you think the changing crime levels reflect changes in crime or the movement of crime into areas not normally reported, digital and domestic crimes, for instance?
Well, we had an increase in reported crimes of fraud online due to the fact that we had this campaign on Facebook, social media in average, and also there are television programs that have been run, and we will have a new series now in November of 3 television programs. And then we expect an increase of reports when it comes to cyber crimes particularly against the elderly people and vulnerable single houses. When it came to domestic violence and child abuses, those went to be more recorded by NGOs than within the police. The likelihood to report went to be more or less the same.
Okay, thank you for that. Back to the information in the crisis workshop. I think this is more a remark and a request just to go deeper into the discussion. Too much information, not enough clarity on what is important and useful for action. How could we improve this? I think this is something we should take with us and discuss later. There was an interesting question: is the transmission of the COVID-19 from one person to another person constituted as a crime? I think that might be different in different countries. And as far as I know, I haven't heard of any country where it is a crime if you knowingly pass it on or deliberately pass it on to somebody. Somebody would like to know how many deaf policemen in Sweden.
Well, it is a crime in Sweden.
Is it?
As it is, yeah, it is when it is a pandemic, it's a crime to pass it on if you plan to do it. We have had extreme groups like violent extremists right hand that actually went to Stockholm and tried to find people with the COVID-19 virus to themselves be affected, so they could spit onto politicians or people they disliked. Gladly, those people being banned from the streets and are very well known by the police. We have no fine written. You could end up in prison if you would go very deep into your act of it.
Oh, thank you for that, May-Britt. That's interesting, and maybe we can get some more information from other countries. How do they deal with that? Do you know how many deaf policemen you have to mourn in Sweden due to COVID-19, May-Britt?
Serving officer 0. We had one that went into retirement and just 3 weeks later took ill and unfortunately passed away. And well, that's the only loss we have had, gladly, comparing to other countries.
The next one, I think, is just a remark. In Italy, police checked 700,000 citizens in just 1 week in March. Over 50,000 violated the regulations and have been reported. So, and then there is a remark from David Javier that you're frightening him. And I think this goes back to your theoretical introduction to risk societies in the 21st century. We should be worried, and we should, as Rod says, take action. We need to find new ways. So what is the new normal? I think that these two belong together, something that should be discussed. But there is a concrete question, I think, for South America. How much interstate cooperation is there in South America? Sergio, Javier, one of you, will you be able to answer that?
I think in South America we have an organization more or less same as Europol, the South America, Latin America international cooperation, but I don't know, maybe General Monar can tell us because he's living in Peru, I am living in Switzerland. I don't know, but I don't know which agreement are right now with the pandemic COVID-19. I don't know, Sergio, if you can tell us. We have an agreement, a special cooperation right now.
Thank you. In Peru, the police received cooperation and the different countries, associations, and principal the interior, the Interior received eyes, no? Eyes for actions. No, complete.
Dímelo en español y yo lo digo. I'm going to
O sea,
translate.
existen convenios internacionales por los cuales se recibe ayuda técnica, pero la principal acción es a través del propio Ministerio del Interior, ¿no?
Okay. General Sarre told me the cooperation is through the Ministry of Interior, no direct to the police. Police to police now is of the political level is the Ministry of Interior. We have maybe a problem in Peru. The police function is very politicized. We are depend of the central government. With sometimes, for me, in my personal opinion, we have always a problem because the politics is always there. In the framework of our duties. Or obligation, but it's political level is very important in our country.
Okay, thank you for that. And one last remark, legitimacy of police, again, a developing theme. And I think we probably have to come back to this at the end of the workshop. So I would like to hand over to May-Britt now again. And May-Britt is going to draw the conclusion of today's workshop. Thank you, May-Britt.
Yeah, I will try to, because it's a very wide area and a lot of information being delivered in this workshop of today. We will continue tomorrow, of course. And what I would like to say is that we can see in all the countries that we've been covering today, domestic violence and child abuses is going to be increased. So also cybercrime and fraud, due to the fact that most of the countries around the world had a lockdown or people moved back home to keep distance from the rest of the population that maybe could be affected. Policing in private homes is not what the police is doing, and it's also very hard to police online. So this went to be the big challenge for all police forces around the world at the time where they also had to change over to do policing of the lockdowns to find people that didn't follow the restrictions that was given by the government. We had one example from Australia where we heard about the pop-up cameras and drones. There could be a way to monitor the people, but at the same time, there are always issues when you put in something temporary. If this will be something that is not temporary any longer, it will be used for a lot of other things, and people will not feel that they are in what we would call the land of freedom. Due to the legislation, there is freedom of movement, but at the same time, with a lockdown, you are not allowed to do certain things. And then when the government put in force things like these pop-up cameras, the CC that take photographs all around the clock and follow everything that we do, they record from the drones, we need to know as citizens if this will be put in the archives for future use, or if it will only be temporarily recorded and then deleted, and by sure deleted. So the company that might provide also got a good contract with the government and the police that might be the one that will be identifying people that break the law. Change of policing. Well, we have already had a change of policing through the climate change, military and armed conflicts around the world that we're still facing, migration flows. This is also mentioned in this workshop. The world doesn't stop because there is a pandemic. The pandemic took us and shocked us, didn't tell us it was on its way. It just came. We were not prepared for it. The shift of pattern of policing went to be a challenge. We had to be both nurses and doctors at the same time for ourselves, as we should patrol the lockdowns, the streets, the crimes that went to be committed, and we never knew if we would be affected. Of course, we got police officers that then are traumatized due to this, that been spit on, that been really attacked by people that we don't know if they are really carrying the COVID-19 virus or not. The loss of police officers around the world also affect the police organization. We are all sad when we hear about any police officer that need to die earlier than what we normally expect. And during duty, then you will be affected by the COVID-19 virus, and you end up very, very ill, and you end up in emergency ward, and you might not come home to your family again. This is very sad moments. And I can just feel very deeply in my heart when I hear about Javier and Sergio talking about Peru, 500 police officers. It's half the number we educate per year in my country are lost, can never be replaced in the same way with the experience they had when they served the public and did their best to protect the rest of us. This is something that could also increase the trust in police if we are willing to speak about it. Community police officers is another solution when it comes to making the public safe and try to make them understand why the government locked down the country and how important it is that those community police officers and the police officers on the street or the civilian staff members in the entrance, in the receptions, are trained to address the public when we speak with them and make them understand why they should follow the recommendations and why we ask them not to be outdoor when it might not be safe, or not to be too many at a table at a restaurant. Our delivery on crime prevention and our delivery on safety when it comes to the pandemic will give us a larger trust in the future, but we need to tell the media and we need to tell everyone we have the chance to speak with. We are facing a new world, many people tell, a new normal, and we don't know what the new normal is because we don't know the enemy. We know the name of the enemy, but we can't see him or her or it. So the new normal, we can't see either. We can only make the very best of it. And for tomorrow, we will listen a little bit more about what is going on in the world around. I will give a new presentation to you. One of the things that can be used by the police to work with domestic violence, for example. There will be a presentation from Ireland, the Republic of Ireland, from one of the community police officers. And we will also listen to New Zealand. They had a different approach compared to many other countries. I hope to see you tomorrow. I hope that this workshop today been fruitful, and there are a lot more to learn and to read. Thank you for today.
Yes, thank you very much, May-Britt. Thank you very much to the other speakers and for their interesting talks. And we're very much looking forward to tomorrow's talks. And and thank you for all of you who joined us and joined the discussion. And before I say goodbye for today, I'm going to give the floor to Karen Duckworth from the college. Have a good day. Bye.
Yes, thank you very much, Ulrika. I just wanted to say a massive thank you to you, May-Britt, Rick Sarre, Javier, and General Monar on behalf of the London Policing College. There's Rod just there. It was an absolutely fantastic session. It really was fascinating and beautifully summed up by May-Britt. I just wanted to also thank our international and UK participants for their active comments and contributions in the chat, because the purpose of the workshops is to draw that insight from across the countries and draw the comparison and the thoughts and experiences, and to be able to take that forward into our conference on the 8th of December. Rod, did you want to say a few words?
No, you've said it all, Karen. Thank you very much to everyone who's participated today, and really looking forward to tomorrow. Thank you again to everyone.
Brilliant. Ulrika, did you want me to just hand back to you, or shall we say we look forward to seeing everybody?
Thank you very much, Karen, and yeah, see you tomorrow. Have a good day, you all. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.